The Jimmy Butler trade rumors are real. After months of speculation on whether or not he wanted out of Miami, going back to Pat Riley's comments in the offseason.
If you're not on the court playing against Boston or on the court playing against the New York Knicks, you should keep your mouth shut.
Then Shams reporting that he wanted out, Butler's agent trying to shut that down, then Jimmy being away from the team, and now a few terrible and disinterested performances, followed by a strange press conference.
I want to see me get my joy back from playing basketball. And wherever that may be, we'll find out here pretty soon.
And then finally, Shams and ESPN have reported that yes, Jimmy Butler officially requested a trade out of Miami and he doesn't care where he goes. And with that news, he immediately goes to the top of the trade target list for a bunch of teams. So let's talk about what teams could go after him, some possible trade packages, and whether or not Miami will actually make this move. First, let's talk about a group of teams that are going to continually come up in Jimmy Butler trade rumors that have basically a 0% chance of actually acquiring him. First is the LA Lakers. Now that they've done the Dorian Finney-Smith trade, gotten rid of D'Angelo Russell's contract, it is basically impossible for them to match the $50 million contract of Jimmy Butler in a trade because they just don't have the contracts for it. They could do Rui Hachimura, they could do Austin Reeves, they could do a couple of other guys, but they would basically have to gut their entire rotation outside of LeBron and Anthony Davis just to get to the point of making the contracts work, not to mention the fact that they don't really have outstanding assets on the roster unless they want to use all their first-round picks to try and acquire Jimmy Butler because the Heat don't really want to take on long-term contracts in this situation because they could just let Jimmy walk, get cap space, and replace him with another player in the offseason. So the Lakers are extremely unlikely to trade for him, but I'm sure you're going to see headlines for that anyway. The other team, which I've already talked about a bunch, of course, is the Phoenix Suns. It's basically impossible unless someone decides they want to take on Bradley Beal's contract. He's got basically the worst contract in sports. He's on a no-trade clause. He has to be okay with getting moved, and if you're going to say, oh, well, he can go to Charlotte, he can go to one of these teams that have a bunch of money, yeah, well, I don't think Bradley Beal is going to want to go to Charlotte. So unless there's some kind of weird construction where you get De'Aaron Fox involved and then the Heat want to take on that and then Beal goes somewhere else, very unlikely he ends up in Phoenix. Then last up is the Mavs. Similar kind of situation with the Lakers where the contracts just don't work. PJ Washington or Klay Thompson has to be in the deal in order for the Mavs to match the salary of Jimmy Butler. And that doesn't make sense for Dallas. It doesn't make sense for Miami. I think those three teams have a basically 0% chance of getting Jimmy Butler. But what about the teams that actually do have a chance? One of the under-the-radar ones that's been mentioned to me a lot that we haven't talked about in previous videos is Memphis. Because this is a team that, if they were to add Jimmy Butler, certainly would raise their contention status. They're in need of a little bit more star power, and it kind of just fits the vibe of their team. The package could potentially be something like Marcus Smart, who has to be in the deal to make the money work, Brandon Clark, Luke Kennard, John Konchar, and a first-round pick from Memphis. You can add more first-round picks if you want to, as always. But I don't think Memphis would do this. It doesn't seem like their kind of move. It feels more like a Cam Johnson team to me. They were in on trying to get Dorian Finney-Smith. I don't think they're necessarily star hunting right now, and I think they'd like to keep Marcus Smart if they can because of the money situation there, and Brandon Clark's someone they'd probably like to keep as well. I don't see this happening for Memphis. It's the same situation as before where you have to put together a bunch of guys that are in your rotation just to bring in Jimmy Butler. You need to sign Jimmy Butler to an extension, of course, as well. I don't think he's a long-term fit in Memphis. I don't see that move coming for them. Now let's get to some real possibilities, some teams that I could actually see trading for Jimmy Butler. First up, the Sacramento Kings continue to come up. You can add first-round picks to this if you would like to. Obviously, Devin Carter is a guy that just got picked in the first round. This is a trade package that would have to be put together in order for the Kings to match the salary of Jimmy Butler. Malik Monk, Kevin Huerter have to be in the deal. Trey Lyles has to be in the deal. Then Devin Carter is there to help make the money work, as well as add assets here for Miami. But even then, this doesn't seem like a deal that makes sense to the Heat at all. And I also don't know why Sacramento would want to get rid of Malik Monk. He's really important to their team. And then you have De'Aaron Fox, you've got DeMar DeRozan, Keegan Murray is still there, which could be used as an asset, but it's just a weird team. And if somehow Sacramento ends up making a deal with Miami, I would expect it to be more so with De'Aaron Fox involved, potentially going to Miami, rather than the Kings trying to add yet another aging star to this roster, the way that they did in the offseason with DeMar DeRozan. But the Kings continue to come up, so I wanted to mention them. Now we get to, this is the big three of like realistic actual options for Miami in terms of who they could send Jimmy Butler to. These are the three teams in order of how likely I think they are to actually acquire Jimmy Butler. First on that list is the Houston Rockets. The reason that they are the lowest of these three teams is because They've had every opportunity to trade for Jimmy Butler from the moment this whole situation started, and they haven't seemed all that interested. There hasn't been a ton of rumors supporting this idea that they want to add Jimmy Butler to this team. And again, it's a similar situation. You're going to have to give up multiple rotation pieces to get Jimmy Butler and then sign him long term. Dillon Brooks or Fred VanVleet have to be in the deal to make the money work. In this construction, Steven Adams is also in there as that expiring contract, Jabari Smith and Cam Whitmore as the assets. And of course, we know that Houston has first-round picks to add to this if they want to further incentivize Miami to make a move. Again, though, I don't know how excited Miami would be about this trade package, nor does it seem like Houston is all that excited. I definitely think it's still an option. It's near the top of the list, but you'd have to get Houston a little bit more interested than they seem to have been so far. Next up in the likelihood rankings here is the Golden State Warriors. We've talked about their trade package in a couple of other videos already, but this is something that I continue to mention. There's a reason that this trade doesn't work on screen, and it's because they can't make the money work, and that is because Andrew Wiggins is not on the deal. Ideally, Golden State would like to add Jimmy Butler and not give up Andrew Wiggins, which they could have done prior to adding Dennis Schroeder to the team. But now they have Dennis Schroeder, they can't move his contract before the deadline. And so now they're looking at a situation where Andrew Wiggins has to be in the trade. These contracts on the left are not enough, and they don't have enough other contracts to add to the deal to make the salary work. So you can take a couple of those guys out, you can add in Andrew Wiggins and make the deal work. But if you're Golden State, does swapping out Wiggins and some of your assets, whether it be Kuminga, Podziemski, or picks or whatever, in exchange for Jimmy Butler, really change your destiny all that much this season? To me, it does not. Which leads me to what I think is the most likely Jimmy Butler team, the team that I would like to see him go to the most, and that is the Denver Nuggets. This is a trade construction we have talked about a bunch. On the screen here, it's only one first-round pick in addition to Michael Porter Jr. and some contracts, but you can add some pick swaps in there as well for Denver if you'd like to. They don't have access to any other outright first-round picks, but some pick swaps could certainly be added. And Miami brings in a player, Michael Porter Jr., that could be a nice long-term piece for them and some draft assets, and they just get out of the Jimmy Butler business. The problem for Miami in this deal specifically, and with all of the deals, is that they're taking on long-term money. They're taking on multiple-year contracts. And one of the benefits of the Butler situation for them is they could, if they wanted to, just let him walk in free agency, have a bunch of salary cap space, and then go out and add somebody else to just replace Jimmy Butler. And that might be better than any of the assets that they're getting exchanged for Butler himself. Which leads me to, this is not a guarantee that this happens before the trade deadline for Miami. They could sign and trade him in the offseason if they wanted to. And if these are the trades on the table, if the Jimmy Butler market looks like this, there's not that much of an incentive for Miami to make this move right now. Maybe if Denver can find a third team to take Michael Porter Jr., then Miami's not really taking on that much long-term salary. They can get some draft assets and move along, and then that way they have the best of both worlds. In an ideal situation here for Miami, they're getting assets, and they're not taking on long-term salary for Butler, so then they get something in addition to what they already would get in the offseason if Butler just walks for nothing. But because his salary is so big, making almost $50 million, and he wants to go to a contending team, those contending teams don't have a giant expiring contract like the Nets do with Ben Simmons that they can easily swap in here in exchange for Butler. Their guys are on long-term deals. Their guys are players like Andrew Wiggins, players like Dillon Brooks, players like Malik Monk, Marcus Smart, Brandon Clark. They don't have a $40 million expiring to make the Butler deal work. And so although, yes, it's interesting and it's exciting that Jimmy Butler has officially requested a trade, the Miami Heat have dug their heels in on this from the very, very start. And they've said publicly they're not trading Jimmy Butler. It doesn't mean that they won't trade him, but it does mean, to me at least, the offers have to be better than what I've shown in the video today to incentivize them to not just let him walk in free agency, maybe try and re-sign him to a one-year deal, try and repair the situation and just get rid of him in the offseason potentially and get cap space. The only counter to that is this is Jimmy Butler, and he can be very destructive to the team if he chooses to. And that is absolutely a possibility. There is a scenario here where Miami creates a situation so toxic that it ruins their entire season, and they just need to get Butler out of there. And that, I think, is what teams will probably wait for. They will wait for the situation to blow up to such an extreme that they can get a bargain in exchange for Jimmy Butler. Miami ends up taking a deal that they didn't necessarily want to take because the situation is that bad. Short of that, I don't necessarily think that the deal is imminent despite the trade request, but I'm very interested to see how it goes from here.